Since the 1950s, 3 museums have been established in his honor, 2 of which are still in operation. The Casey Jones story has permeated every facet of our culture. Music, art, literature, television, movies, toys, games, history, and even fashion. So who was this man who had such an impact that it has lasted over 100 years? Let's take a look.
John Luther Jones was born March 14, 1863 in southeast Missouri to country school teacher Frank Jones and his wife Ann. He was the first of 5 children. At age 13, his family moved to the small community of Casey, Kentucky, which is how he eventually got his nickname. As a boy, he developed a growing obsession with trains, from hanging around the bustling train depot in Casey. At age 15, he went to work for the Mobile and Ohio Railroad as a telegrapher in nearby Columbus. In 1881, he moved to Jackson, Tennessee, still an employee of the M&O, to take a job as a flagman. There, he stayed at the Charles Brady family boarding house, a favorite spot for Jackson railroaders. When asked where he was from, Jones said Casey, Kentucky. Now, from that day on, he would be known as Casey Jones. Casey would later marry his landlord's daughter, Jenny Brady. They married at St. Mary's Catholic Church in 1886. They would later have 3 children, Charles, Helen, and John Lloyd, also known as Casey Jr. Casey was later promoted to brakeman on the Columbus, Kentucky to Jackson, Tennessee route, and then to fireman on the Jackson to Mobile, Alabama route. On March 1st, 1888, Casey switched jobs to Illinois Central, firing a freight locomotive between Jackson and Water Valley, Mississippi. He was finally promoted to engineer, his lifelong goal, in 1890 at the age of 26. Jones went on to reach the pinnacle of the railroad profession as a crack locomotive engineer for the IC. Railroading was a natural talent, and Jones was recognized by his peers as one of the best in the business. He was also known for his insistence that he always get there on the advertised. That is, that he would never be found to be falling down or behind schedule when he arrived at his destination. He was so punctual that it was said that people set their watches by his unusual and recognizable whippoorwill whistle. In February 1900, Casey was transferred from Jackson to Memphis for the Memphis to Canton, Mississippi leg of the Cannonball passenger run, which ran from Chicago to New Orleans. This run offered the fastest schedules in the history of railroading. Some veteran engineers doubted the times could be met, and some even quit. But Casey saw it as an opportunity and would drive until the night of his fateful last ride on engine number 382. In Memphis on the morning of April the 29th, after a run from Canton to Memphis, Casey was asked to double up and take the southbound run back to Canton that night because the regular engineer had become ill. Number 1 came into Memphis 4 behind schedule, and Casey had to make up for lost time on the return trip. 6'4" Casey climbed into the cab and that fatal ride began. With Casey was fireman Sim Webb. It was a wet and foggy night, poor visibility but good conditions for speed, as steam engines operated best in such damp weather. When Casey passed through Grenada, he was only 40 minutes behind schedule. As Casey pushed number 382 southward, he continued to pick up speed.
On today's fine road bed, it could have traveled 100 miles an hour, probably more. We may easily have reached that speed.
By the time Casey had to take sighting to let the northbound Cannonball number 2 pass Goodman, he was only 5 minutes behind schedule. In Canton, Mississippi, his destination was next. But he would have to pass through Vaughn, Mississippi, and at Vaughn, trouble awaited.
This is the situation at this point of Casey's run. He is 14 miles from his destination, Canton, Mississippi. He is heading into the little town of Vaughn, going 75 miles an hour. Casey knows there will be several freights in this town of Vaughn, but he knows that these freights will all be on sidings to let him come through on the main line because he has a passenger train in mail. What he does not know is that two freight trains on one siding, while trying to clear the north switch, were stalled due to a broken air hose on one of the freights. This left 3 freight cars and a caboose out on the main line, with Casey rapidly approaching at about 75 miles an hour. When a red light on the caboose is spotted as Casey's 382 comes around the curve, Casey knows he is about to crash into the back of the stalled freight train. Instinctively, Casey does everything he can to save his passengers and the crew. First, he tells his fireman, Sim Webb, to jump. Sim jumps and is shaken up, but lives 57 years after the crash. With one hand, Casey pulls on the whistle cord to warn all the crew of the impending crash. With his other hand, Casey pulls on the brake to slow his engine as much as possible before plowing into the back of the stalled freight. Casey slowed from 75 to 35 miles an hour before the crash. His engine turned over and Casey was killed. But by slowing his engine so much, all the passenger cars stayed upright on the track, and no passenger was killed or seriously injured. Casey Jones died, saving all the passengers and crew on his train. There are disagreements about warning signals and circumstances surrounding the wreck, but one thing on which we all can agree is that Casey Jones died a hero.